I want to start back in the early 1980s. So I was in college, I was studying business, and a book came out, and it was called Positioning: The Battle for Your Mind. I don't know if you remember that book or not, but it was written by Ries and Jack Trout. And basically, the argument that they made in that book that marketing was really not about products, it was more about positioning in terms of your mind, and that our minds are limited, that we can only hold a certain amount of information in there, and that if you're a marketer, you really have to like own a category, you have to own a word so that when people think of your product or service, something immediately comes to mind. And I think the best example of that is Volvo, that we can all relate to. And so a lot of people think of Volvo and they think of safety. So they sort of own that word, they sort of own that category. Now, I think things have evolved a little bit since the early 1980s, and since they talked about this idea of positioning is really sort of the perceptions in the mind. So, how do you think about? Let's kind of start with sort of that version, and how do you think that has or has not evolved over time, and then tell me how your firm, Objective Brand, how do you think about the branding, the marketing in terms of those terms, and where maybe have you evolved from what Al Ries and Jack Trout were talking about 40 some years ago?
Yeah, I don't think it has changed all that much. I mean, going back even further, back to the Mad Men days on Madison Avenue, I mean, advertising has some basic principles that remain true, whether it's digital, online, it's physical and print, and positioning, brand narrative, all those types of things are timeless. And that's how we've built our firm. That's our entire basis is that we start at the foundation. We start with that strategic narrative and positioning so that anything we do from a tactic perspective, and no matter how technology or channels develop and change over time, our strategy will continue to evolve and fit that output because we've based it in a, again, strong narrative driven researched foundation. When it comes to, I guess like the Volvo example, I like that example. I think modern brands, it's a little bit more difficult with the amount of channels that you can live within. But again, going back to that foundational strategy, that's the key is understanding where your audience lives first and foremost, and that determines how to best craft a message that you can build that level of credibility and familiarity that Volvo was able to do at a broad level, and of course, at millions of dollars in budget, but still very possible on a small scale too.
hmm Yeah, and your point about channels, if we go back to the early 1980s, we basically had ABC, NBC, CBS, and cable for the most part wasn't really a thing much back then. And today, of course, we've got all the social media and everything. So it's very
Yeah,
much a fragmented marketplace, and there's so many different ways. So it's kind of hard to just, we're going to advertise on the Super Bowl and we're good to go for the year. Although some people still do
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but as I think about your firm, before I
Yeah,
kind of tell you what I think about it, tell me a little bit more about Objective Brand because I have a perception of your firm
yeah,
just from what I've seen on social media, the fact that I know some of your clients. So I've got an idea, but I'd love to hear from you because you and I have never really talked before. So I'd
yeah.
love to hear from you. How do you describe Objective Brand, and maybe even before that, why did you start Objective Brand?
Yeah. So I started Objective Brand in 2022. Before that, I had spent roughly 7 or 8 years in the financial services industry. First at a TAMP, turnkey asset manager, called Formula Folios, where we served, I can't remember the exact number, but dozens, if not hundreds, of financial advisors, help them grow from 1.5 to 4 billion or so in assets. And my role there was partnering with financial advisors to build their brand and marketing platform. From that, I followed the founder, Jason Wink, there to his startup Altruist, which he had the opportunity to start out in Los Angeles. I followed him out to Orange County, where the prior firm was. And I joined Altruist as the first team member. I, again, similar to what we did from Folios, headed up the brand and marketing, but this time it was for Altruist as their VP of brand and design. My background is in design, so everything we do now today at Objective Brand and throughout my career is really started with a design thinking foundation before we get too far into again, tactics and messaging and narrative. We go back to kind of the principles of good design and how to communicate from a visual point of view, which, married with really good sound messaging is a powerful platform. So yeah, eventually I got to the point at Altruist where I wanted to work directly with financial advisors again. I loved helping Jason and team build Altruist, but my passion lies in helping small, medium-sized businesses build their brand, their messaging, their websites. Even, I mean, we kind of are relatively full service, at least in the sense that we help architect and direct full service marketing campaigns and go-to-market strategy. So I launched Objective Brand, and yeah, the rest is history.
And
Mm.
I hope you got some stock in Altruist and that you kept it because they are certainly kicking butt these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Hoping that we have an exit at some point. That'd be great.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. So as I think about Objective Brand, just sort of looking at you from the outside, what I see
Yeah,
is that you guys not only do the marketing, the messaging, the positioning, but I think a mistake that a lot of firms can make is that they feel like, gosh, if I can just get my messaging right or just get my marketing right, then everything's going to be okay. But in
yeah,
reality, you got to make sure that the business behind the message and the marketing that you're doing can actually
mm,
support and be fully aligned with your go to market
yes.
messaging and
Good
positioning.
point.
And
Yeah,
so I sort of get a sense that you guys not only do the first part, which is the marketing and the messaging and the branding piece, but you also sort of work at a strategic level with firms to really sort of understand. I think you used the word architecture about
yeah,
how is the business built. You do the initial research to make sure you know everything you can about the business, and then make sure that the marketing and messaging is aligned with what the business is actually built to deliver. So would that be fair, or am I overstating what you guys are doing?
somewhat. It's interesting. We have certainly, as our firm has evolved over the past 4 years, have gone more and more into that realm. But I think that's been a byproduct of the nature of our brand and marketing work because we get to intimately understand and know a business at its core so well that we are equipped to help give them that type of guidance, especially with our perspective from having worked with dozens of IRAs. So, I think of it more along the lines of we try to work with firms who have already done a lot of that work and they have a good business and they have some sort of client service model that is performing well. And that's the inflection point that we come in to help amplify that message. But in that process, oftentimes we'll cross over into business consulting, especially around their process and how to communicate that in a way that clients understand and makes it more repeatable as they bring on more and more clients at a greater scale.
And it also looks like you guys are pretty clear on the idea that marketing is both the best marketing is both a great attractor and it's a great repeller. So I think on your website,
Mm,
you make it pretty clear like, if you're this, then we'd be great. If you're this over here, we're not a great fit. So you use
yeah,
sort of the attraction repeller idea as well. So as you look at all these different RIA firms out there, both in your altruist days or even even before that when you're working with the TAMP and then
yeah.
today, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see RIAs making today when it comes to how they are presenting themselves to the public?
I would say a lack of personality would be one of the biggest things. Oftentimes, when firms come to us, it's because they see our work and they see the level of, again, personality and craft that we put into our work. It looks and feels so different than anything else, feels differentiated. But the truth is, that's, yes, certainly we have great design, amazing copy, sound strategy that we put a lot of time and effort into, but that's only as good as the product that we're applying it to. So, a financial advisor or really anybody who's trying to get their name out there, one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give is don't be afraid to show your personality. I think authenticity is one of these kind of buzzwords that a lot of people don't like, but it's a buzzword for a reason because that authenticity is what helps you stand out and show your personality. I'd say 9 out of 10 financial advisor websites or brands that I come across, they look and feel more or less the same because they're afraid or timid to put themselves out there in a real way.
Yeah, and So you're going to attract those advisors that do want to put themselves out there. And I'd love to talk about some of your clients if that's okay. I think
Yeah,
like James
let's do
Cano,
it.
for example, at Root Financial, I think one of your earlier clients, certainly a great success story. A lot of folks listening
Yeah.
to this might be familiar with James and his team, and he's got a huge YouTube channel that's been very successful. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that story in terms of what was the objective there in terms of when you started working with them? How has that evolved over time?
Yeah. Yeah, so he was our first, our business, we kind of two sides. We call it the new build side, where we build a brand from the ground up, the entire kind of marketing engine behind a business. And then the ongoing partnerships where we have a monthly engagement. We continue to work with them on initiatives. They were our first new build client. And James had reached out, wanted really badly to work with me after having seen what we'd done at Altruist and the success we had there. I'd met him actually at an Altruist event way back when, and it didn't even clock in my memory. Oh, I guess I know you. The number one goal I think was, obviously to modernize the brand, help differentiate it, all the things that we did at Altruist really well. He wanted that for Root, but beyond that, he wanted to, the brand was really revolving around him and his personality, but he had started to hire more advisors and wanted to portray something larger so that when clients would come in the door, they wouldn't expect I'm going to work with James Canal. They understand that there is a company behind this, that there's a process and a proprietary way of serving clients that no matter who it is at Root, they're going to get that same level of care. So that's what we started with is not only modernizing the brand, but injecting that personality. Like I talked about earlier, the brand before we came into the picture was just like any other advisor brand, very blue, very kind of understated, and lacked, great photography and video. It didn't tell the story about who Root was and what they stood for. So that's what we spent the initial build digging deep into is what is the narrative? What's the story behind Root Financial? And yes, it's evolved a lot over the past 4 years or so. But if you go to their about page today, that narrative that we built on day one is more or less still intact. The copy and the flow, it's again kind of evolving as their team grows, but who Root is at its core hasn't shifted. And yeah, it's been an amazing experience working with James and the Root team. It's they are they converted from new build to ongoing partnership, so we've been able to be a part of that story over the years and help them grow along the way.
Well, and I think his situation points out a concern that some advisors have, which is if an advisor founds a firm, they become the face of the firm, they go into the marketplace, they become the business development, maybe they become
Yeah,
a celebrity on social media. And like you said, it's like, oh, well, I want to work with James, or I want to work with Jeremy, or I want to, work with Mary type thing. And how hard was that at Root or even at other firms that you work with, where if the firm was founded and built around a personality, and now that personality says, "Whoa, I want to kind of pull back and let other people
yeah,
get the limelight so that I can enjoy some of my time here, get back some of my time." How do you make that shift? Has that been difficult? Do you have any ideas on the
yeah.
best way to make that shift?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, my first instinct is to say that it's not as difficult as people make it out to be. It seems like this big, hairy thing that people can't figure out. At the same time, I say that from a point of privilege where this is what we do, this is what we
Hmm.
specialize in. But I would say that's the power of brand. If you're trying to make that shift without having anything to pull back from and put in front of clients, then of course, naturally, it's going to be difficult if you're kind of just standing behind a name and maybe a logo that was designed for you. A good brand thoughtfully communicates something greater than yourself. It communicates your vision and what you stand for, and shows the team at large. And even if you have a small team, it's still important to show that behind this team is again that system, that process, that proprietary thinking that we've put in place because we're experts at what we do. And no matter who delivers this system, you're going to get that same level of care and quality because it kind of connects back to that initial brand.
And I want to use a specific example here of
Yeah.
YouTube because we've got James is big on YouTube. You've got another client, Jeremy Finger, who I know who is also
Yeah.
on YouTube. You've got other people on YouTube as well. And let's say that you've got someone who has built a big brand on YouTube as the face of that channel. And now, for whatever reason, they decide, I don't want to be the face of that channel anymore. And I want someone else at the firm to be the face of that channel. How would you go about making that shift so that there's really very little, if any, dip in the viewership or the new business or leads that are being generated from that? Or ideally, even make the channel even bigger than the person
Yeah.
who's now exiting the picture here.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. We actually haven't come into that too much. I mean, at Root, the way they approached it, I should preface this by saying we are not YouTube experts. That's another beast where you can, go on such a deep rabbit hole that we certainly consult on it. And, again, back to my original statement around a good brand, a good strategy, and a good foundation, no matter where deployed, will perform well. And that's what we saw with James's YouTube channel after we
Mhm.
deployed that brand. It skyrocketed over the next couple of years. But I would say, using Root as an example, Ari on their team has created his own content network on YouTube, and actually, his channel is producing more leads now than James's channel. So, it just goes to show that it's not, they both have very special, unique personalities, certainly, but YouTube is one of these things that it's such a large platform. And there's so many people out there that connect with different types of personalities that if you're putting yourself out there consistently with strong messaging, a clear value proposition, you'll find your audience. So when it comes to making that transition away from yourself to somebody new, I would say, if I were making just my best guess as a brand person, it would be kind of a slower transition. I would start to think about how do I incorporate this person more and more into my segments so that I can start to introduce their personality and make that connection because I have to imagine there's a lot of overlap. And I would also think through maybe creating a series within your channel so that it's not just hey, I'm gone. It's we have this other series, and as that gains traction over time, then the main personality slowly weans off of that channel.
And how do you think about a firm that wants to evolve their brand? So let's say they come to you as a new client and you look at their existing brand and say, I think we're going to have to make some significant changes here. So how does that shift work knowing that, well, we built our business off of this brand right now. Clients came to us
Mm.
because they were attracted to
Yeah.
some extent to this brand, but now we're going to evolve it. So how do you think about that strategically if I'm going to come out with a new brand? How does that process work?
Mm. Yeah, most brands that we come across, I mean, there are brands that come to us with a great foundation, but I would say the vast majority haven't really spent a lot of time thinking through it actually. So we're dealing with kind of a 0 to 1 build. And the client base that they have, they're not necessarily buying into the brand as much as the personality, the person
Mhm.
behind that brand or personalities. It might be a team of people already. So typically our job is to tell the story of the people behind the brand today in a better, more well articulated way. And there is certainly cases where, again, there is a strong brand in place. And if that is the case, then we're usually taking our lens. I mean, we have a different perspective than whoever built that brand. So, we'll apply our way of building brands to it, our way of designing things and narrative. I mean, it's not just design and copy, it's video too. So oftentimes I think brands struggle to bring that all together into one cohesive single message. So a firm like ours can diagnose where they're at, understand what's working well with their audience, what are these things that attracted them in the first place, clarify that message, and then amplify it across all of their channels.
And this is just a little piece of the whole marketing branding mix, but like the name of a firm. So
Yeah.
some firms have the founder's name or founders' names as the name of the firm, and others have more of some kind of generic name. Both can work, obviously, because we've got great success stories either way. But how do you think about the naming of a firm?
Yeah, yeah, that is a big topic that we come across quite often. If a name is not doing you any favors, we try to do some sort of research project with with names. If it is at least like a hunch that it might not be serving us well, oftentimes it's an acronym or it's a difficult to say, word or name. If clients aren't connected to that name when we do our research, they usually are talking about the people that they work with as opposed to the brand on the front end. Then we usually recommend a name change. It's not that difficult. I mean, a lot of people think, well, I can reprint thousands of dollars of material, but we can do that slowly. But like you said, there's success stories either way. We have companies that we work with who have acronyms, and so long as there's a clear, attractive story, that's something with a lot of personality behind it, people will make that connection, whether it's an acronym or a word that they loosely understand.
Mhm. And you've used the word story a number of times here. So tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that, how the idea of story gets communicated to the public, what is the value of quote the story in the
Mhm.
whole messaging and communication and attracting people to the brand. So what's the role of story there?
Yeah. So there's several different levels to this. There's the idea of the founder story. Ultimately, the founder sets the tone for the rest of the business. So understanding why they started their business, why they continue to serve clients, what matters to them, what they care deeply about. That's important. And that type of story, even all the way back to a founder's upbringing and how that shaped their worldview and how they help people, with their lives today. But then there's also the story that evolves naturally as your company grows. Root being a good example of a firm. When we started working with them I think they had 3 or 4 people, and now there's 70 plus, I believe. So obviously, the story of James is less and less relevant as time goes on, but the story of Root now is taking shape. The way that they hire, the way that they do business, the way that they hold their team retreats and work remotely with each other. There's a vibe behind them that, in some ways, it naturally comes up, but good branding takes that story that's evolving and repackages it in a way that we can continue to tell consistently across all channels. So whether they're recruiting new team members or launching a new initiative on YouTube or some sort of new conference, we can continue to tell that story in a way that reinforces what they're naturally building.
So Root, again, another great example here. You mentioned they had maybe 3 or 4 people when you started. Now they got maybe 70. So how do you keep that vibe? How do you keep that brand fresh? How do you keep it relevant as a firm gets larger? So, they've got 70 employees. There's other companies that have 700. There's others that have 7,000 employees
Yep.
in our space. So, what role does branding play as a company gets bigger? Does the brand have to evolve as the company gets bigger, or is it just there's certain fundamentals that the brand pillars, so to speak, that aren't going to change as the company gets bigger? Maybe they become even more important as the company gets bigger. How do you think about brand as companies grow over time?
Yeah. Yeah, it certainly evolves, at least from a visual and messaging perspective, kind of surface level messaging anyway. I would use Altruist as a good example of a company that, again, I helped build that brand from day one when it was just myself and Jason Wink. That was built around Jason's way of thinking, his mission, his philosophy, what he wanted to put out into the world. That hasn't changed today, several years later. The Ultra still stands for those same things. The things that have been rearticulated are the things that are packaging that. So yes, it needs to shift and evolve and refresh as trends change and the audience you're speaking to changes. They continue to move up market and are working with bigger and bigger firms and enterprise level. So there's needs to be a more sophisticated way of communicating. Same with Root, they move up market over time. But the core, again, mission, the values, the way that the founder, the core founding team thinks, that's the bedrock of a good brand that will, Ultra is the first version of the brand and this new version now. They are different, but I would say the vibe is more or less the same. It's a disruption vibe that is, trying to change the status quo and go against the big guys and believes in modern design. And, it's a little bit, I guess, alternative is one way I would think of it. Root, similarly, we've evolved their brand over the years, but the spirit of it is the same. And I would say the next iteration will probably carry that through, just a little bit of a different package.
Mhm. And maybe this isn't an issue, but I think of Root Financial, and there's two names that I know. I know James and I know Ari. I
Yeah.
think of Altruist, and I only know one name, and that's Jason. Yet he's got this huge company. So you're not with Altruist anymore. And if you were giving them advice today, what kind of feedback would you be giving them? Is that a concern that Jason is still sort of the face of the firm and he really sort of shapes the vibe and he's a cool guy and he's built a cool business and he's done a tremendous job building that organization and being really disruptive and causing some of the bigger
Mm.
competitors to be a little bit concerned. So how do you think about Altruist these days? As since you were there at the very early days, and now it's this it's really quite an
Yeah.
accomplishment what they've done there.
Yeah. It's such a cool story to watch. And I'm still friends with so many people over there. I love their story. Yeah, that's something that comes up a lot. I don't view founder-led marketing or communication as a bad thing, as long as we're building a brand around that founder in a thoughtful way that can live beyond them if they ever do decide to step down. I mean, think of, like Tesla or Walmart. Like there are key names, key people that we know behind those companies, but that brand still stands for something. If they went away tomorrow, I would say those brands, obviously Walmart, the founder is long gone. So as long as, Jason, James continue to take their I hate to call it star power, but that is in some ways what it is, their star power online and their founder-led thinking and apply it to the altruist and root brand, it'll continue to strengthen that brand and get it to a wider audience. I know for a fact there are people who work with altruist and work with root who don't know James or Jason at all. They may have heard their names, but their interest is in the product or the service that they provide. So over time, that'll continue to multiply as their brands get bigger and bigger in the markets that they serve.
Yeah, I think Apple's another interesting example that I think all of us can relate to
Yeah.
when you think about Steve Jobs. Okay, it doesn't really get much more iconic than Steve Jobs, and Apple is Steve Jobs. Well, of course, he passed away more than a decade ago now,
Yeah.
and the company is dramatically bigger under Tim Cook. And Tim Cook is sort of the antithesis of Steve Jobs in terms of personality and visibility. So, as an outside observer, what do you think Apple was able to do effectively? Now, I know it's maybe kind of hard to compare Apple to a billion dollar RIA firm, but there might be some lessons in there that we can learn in terms of how they did such a great
Yeah.
transition, building this iconic brand, and then the iconic founder passes away, and we get the operational expert in there to run the company, and it hasn't skipped a beat at all. In fact, it's probably gained many beats since then.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it's that big of a jump from a firm like that or a company like that to a firm in the wealth space. The principles behind what they did, I'd say what they did really well is have a clear, strong point of view about what they believe in, why they build products. I'm a big believer of start with why, the Simon Sinek mode of thinking. People buy why you do what you do, not what you do. And Apple did that incredibly well. They also did or built a brand that consistently showed up with I hate to say vibe or language, but it's truly what it is, a design
Mhm.
language behind both their products and their online presence that when you see it, you know that's Apple because again, they have a strong point of view about how things should exist in the world. From their point of view, it should be minimalist, it should be clean, it should be concise. And even if you took their Apple logo away from several of their products or assets, you would know that's an Apple built system. So, I think a wealth firm that might be aspirational to get to that level, but I would argue to say it's not that big of a jump. If you look at Root as an example again, who's having great success in this space, if you take their logo off of the assets that we build, there is a distinct look and feel for the Root style of marketing or building brand.
Yeah, I mean, and I think every brand that you guys have done, there's a clear aesthetic to it that you can look at that just like you look at Apple as you were describing. It's like there's a clear, oh, that's like an Apple product kind of thing. I think Objective Brand has a very clear aesthetic as well, which is for the most part quite different than the typical firm in our space. And I think that's obviously why one reason why you guys are standing out is because you're very different. And it sort of gets to this idea of marketing as an attractor. And so I'd love to get some of your thoughts on how do you think about marketing and branding as attracting people as opposed to more outbound, pushing messages out and hoping that people are going to respond to that more direct response type marketing type thing versus more of an attraction because people
Mm,
like I just love the vibe that I'm feeling from this organization or from their products or from their
yep.
website or from the communication. It's like I want to be part of that. So
Yeah.
how do we create that kind of thing?
Yeah. It's a good question. I would say for Objective Brand, it's unique because what we do is so visual that we have the benefit of, people looking at something, being able to say, I want that. Financial advice is a little bit trickier, but I think there are some principles that, do translate. So, with Objective Brand, we've created a look and feel for ourselves, and we have a product and a way of doing business that, to your point, I think people can recognize now. So, part of it is just continuing to put that on the world consistently and in a way that people can draw that back, that kind of through line to whoever built or provided that service or product. So with Root or SD Capital or any of the other companies in our portfolio, what we're trying to do is take what is already a really good product and service that people like, repackage it in a way that people can understand more clearly and can connect to something larger than the people behind that business. And if that service is being delivered at such a high level, it's going to naturally kind of draw people in and attract them through referrals and just the nature of people talking about their financial advisor, the company that they work with, and directing them to their assets. I will say it's difficult to, for lack of a better term, put lipstick on a pig. So,
Hmm.
we have certainly had clients in the past, and we've gotten really good at this stage of our company where we've defined our ICP and we know who we work really well with. But we've had companies come to us where we realized this is actually not the best service or product. A brand is not going to materially change the face of their business. There has to be some sort of formula working already and some sort of interest in what you're doing before good brand and marketing can serve you well.
One of the goals of advisors who do a lot of, let's call it content marketing, whether it's a YouTube channel or other social media type stuff, is they want to essentially pre-sell a prospect so that
Yeah.
if the prospect is going to YouTube and watching their videos or listening to their podcasts or reading their content, their blogs and whatnot, they're going to feel close and attached to that person already so that by the time they're ready to consider hiring a financial advisor, they reach out. And I mean, I've had a podcast for many, many years. And, I hear people say, I feel like I know you because I've been listening to you for years. So you're sort of building that
Mm.
trust in advance through the content. So content
Yeah.
can certainly do that. How do you think of that from a branding standpoint in terms of what you try to do? Because this is a service business, obviously. This is a trust based business. So, how do you communicate that trust through your messaging and storytelling and communication as a branding firm? How do you help advisors accelerate that part of the process?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of levels. One, you mentioned trust, and that's you build trust by, from my perspective anyway, by showing up in an authentic way. And again, back to that personality and what we try to inject into all the brands that we work with. People trust people. If you land on a financial advisor's website and there's a lot of discussion around financial planning and 401k and all these kind of terms that oftentimes go over the top of the heads of the audience without a lot of discussion around who the firm is, what they believe, how they provide value in your life, it's going to land flat. So that's one area where brand can help build that trust is by telling a story that feels personal and unique that again, back to your point, with content, the goal is to create that conversation before they get to the conversion point so that it feels like a natural transition. It's the same with brand. We're having that conversation across every touch point that we deploy that brand. So that's the kind of the other area where I would say brand does that work is beyond, having a point of view and conveying that personality that's unique to the firm. It's now deploying that consistently across all channels so that no matter where I interact with that brand, I know, okay, this is, SD Capital or holistic planning. There's a distinct, again, look and feel. There's a consistent message that we determine makes sense for the audience that we're trying to reach in our discovery phase. And we, again, deploy that over and over, whether it's email, social, in-person events, even all the way down to our sales process and thinking through sales enablement. The message needs to be consistent across every channel. And I would say content is one of these things where it maybe we're going to get to that. I'll hold my thoughts on content. It's kind of a beast.
Okay. So we talked earlier about the best marketing being both an attractor and a repellent. And
Yeah.
there's some people in financial services that are very provocative and they attract a lot of attention, and some of them have built huge businesses. How do you think about this idea of purposely being provocative as a way to attract attention versus, well, we want to be authentic.
Mm,
Totally
yeah.
understand that. And is there any fine line between being authentic, but also maybe being purposely provocative because I want to attract some attention? Is it the people who are really provocative? They're just being their authentic selves, and so it's not like they're putting a mask on or
Mm,
they're acting or anything like that. So, how do you think about this idea of how far a financial advisor should go in terms of taking stands or taking positions? Because I think there is a bit of at least a lot of advisors that I talk to, many of them are like, I just want to be sort of and I'm not talking politics here,
yeah.
but they're like, I don't want to like say anything financially that could like alienate some people because, I don't want to like potentially alienate any
Yeah.
clients. So how do you think about this idea of being authentic and communicating, taking positions on financial questions that could go either way, that sort of thing from a
Yeah.
branding marketing standpoint?
Yeah, I think it kind of comes back to the type of brand that you want to build. Yeah, principally speaking, we live in an attention economy. So certainly a more provocative stance, if communicated in a way that grabs attention, can work much better than a brand that's saying nothing at all. So yes, fundamentally that can work. But yeah, I would say it can do often have to do more damage than good. So you have to be careful, especially if you're trying to build a legacy brand, something that stands for something greater than yourself and can be communicated, amplified across everybody that works at your company and all future team members. That provocativeness and that very strong stance, again, it's difficult to amplify, especially as you go up market and stakes get higher and higher. But yeah, again, I would say fundamentally speaking, it can work. It does work. We've all seen it work. You just have to decide what makes sense for you and the brand that you want to create.
Hmm. Yeah, well, you mentioned content, so let's talk about that
Yeah.
for a minute here. Let me just start with just a big general question. Like, how do you think
Yeah.
about content in this day and age where we're just flooded with content? We're flooded
Yes.
with multiple channels that we can communicate on. So, what are your sort of high level thoughts to start with on content and content marketing?
Yeah. So content, it's at the stage, at least within our industry, in the financial advice industry, where everybody wants to do the same thing. They see one person do it and it's working, so everybody does it. I would say that's oftentimes a mistake. And what we try to help our clients understand is that we need to understand your audience incredibly well before we decide where to deploy your message. We'll do surveys with their client base and sometimes find out that they're not watching YouTube at all. And their preferred channel of communication is email, and they're not doing any email at all. So first and foremost, we need to understand what content makes sense for the audience that A, you're communicating to today, and B, the type of audience that you want to attract in the future. And when it comes to producing content, you're right. It is kind of like we're all just flooded with it at this point. It's hard to know what to pay attention to and hard to care too at this point. So that provocative messaging, I think, oftentimes comes to the top just because there is so much out there. But being specific with your content, I think, is key. The broader messages don't seem to be performing quite as well, at least not among the firms that are smaller and have a smaller audience. The bigger you get, obviously, you already have that baked in audience, but you have to have very targeted, very specific messages or topics that you build, whether it's a blog, email, YouTube video. That's the type of stuff that will get in front of the eyes of the people that you care about.
How much do you encourage your clients to get really targeted in their marketing when it comes to content, for example? So, for example, do you say, okay, you should get so specific that you're targeting oil executives at major oil firms in Tulsa, Oklahoma? I mean, that's pretty specific.
Yeah.
So, do you encourage people to get super specific? Can you have two or three target markets like that? What are some of the parameters that we should think about as a firm is trying to figure out how deep and narrow do we want to go here in our targeting, in our target
Yeah.
marketing?
Yeah, I have a lot of strong feelings about this because I think there's this level of thinking around, niching down to the point of like I serve this age person, like you said, in this profession, I only serve doctors, whatever it is. I think it's quite limiting. I will say the smaller your firm is, the earlier you are in your journey, the better that works, the more important it is, to gain your footing and gain some sort of client base that you can then build off of and expand. But I think more about psychographics than I do demographics. So, what are the commonalities behind the people that we work well with, that we like working with today? Where do they spend their time? What do they care about? What are they worried about? These kind of big picture things that do differ depending on the age of people you like to work with, where they're at in their life, where they are in the country. Somebody from the middle of Texas is going to have a different worldview than somebody in New York. The bigger you get and the more national you get, that might become more difficult. But yeah, so that's kind of a long way of saying I think a narrow audience works earlier in your journey, but as you move further into larger audiences, you're going to start limiting yourself. And I think clients start to see that type of messaging as limiting, and they feel like, is this truly the right firm for me? Do I need, a bigger, more capable company that serves a wider audience? That's what we've seen in our work, at least. But I've also been proven wrong. I've seen really big firms with niches that are doing well. So
Hmm. And does your firm stick basically to the branding, or do you get involved in like digital advertising and coming up with the advertising campaigns and the copy and the imaging for digital marketing? Do you go to that area too, or?
yeah, we help with the systematic thinking behind those channels. So we'll build the campaign narrative and the overall structure of here's who we're targeting and what our message is. We might even help with some high level design and direction, but ultimately we have partner firms that execute those types of things on a daily basis. And I should say that's where that narrow targeting becomes more relevant.
Mhm.
Even if the core of your brand has a broader target audience and you want to serve a wider range of people, when you get into digital marketing and outbound advertising, that's where it is really helpful to get very specific with who you're targeting. And you can have 3 or 4 campaigns running, like you said, like oil executives in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or startup employees who have equity. That's the type of narrow audience that will make those campaigns shine.
And from a high level view, what areas are you seeing are doing well these days, whether it's things like digital advertising or Facebook ads or webinars or in-person
Yeah.
seminars or stuff like that? So some maybe from a broader marketing standpoint, what are some areas where you're seeing your clients are having success?
Yeah, webinars and in-person events certainly still work quite well. The issue with those is that they're harder to automate and create a system around that works for you when you're not putting your time and effort into. Meta still works quite well, but it's a little bit broader. LinkedIn advertising actually works quite well, especially if you have a specific audience like oil executives at specific companies. The key with those types of campaigns is that you need an ad that speaks to that direct audience, and then your landing page should match that message. You can't run a broad ad to a broad landing page. It has to be very specific and targeted. But that's where, that's where you have these kind of ancillary parts of your brand that aren't connected to the core. There might be that kind of consistent look and feel and overall message and philosophy around how you provide advice, but now we're applying to that to this specific audience. Email still works incredibly well. There's just kind of these tried and true areas that aren't going away. And when I think about systematizing a brand and creating an automated lead gen channel, I try to think about the lowest hanging fruit, and that's typically things like email, organic social. Certainly video and YouTube is performing well if you're consistent, but again, that's one of those high effort things that you have to really commit to. You can't kind of half-ass that, if you will.
A lot of advisors try to outsource their social media. So they'll work with other platforms or service providers that will write the content and they'll post it on LinkedIn or they'll post it on X or Facebook or whatever, or Instagram. And do you see that that works, or does the advisor physically need to be on there posting something and letting people know that, hey, I'm a real person and this isn't something that I put into my social media platform a month ago, and these are the 30 messages that are going to go out every day for the next 30 days kind of thing. So are consumers aware enough that they can sniff out that, oh, this was an automated message versus, oh, this advisor actually was on here 2 minutes ago and just posted this
Mhm.
reply kind of thing? So because we got a lot of technology today that can automate a lot of this stuff and make it
Yeah.
sound like it's coming from the advisor. Is that a good thing, bad thing? How should we think about that?
Yeah. I've seen it both work well and be terribly executed. It really comes down to exactly that, the level of execution. We have a couple of founders that we work with who have very talented teams behind them, great writers that can spend a lot of time with them to understand their tone of voice and the topics that they care about and what their point of view is, so that when they create those messages for them, looks and feels like them. But I have also seen the other side of that where you outsource it to a company that doesn't truly know you or understand you, and it's just noise and it's wasted time and effort. So if you are going to do it, it needs to be done with a high level of craft with somebody who truly knows you or has the time to spend with you so that they can relay that in a way that's authentic to your voice. But that's still an uphill battle. If you truly want to gain traction quickly, the best route is to be there, be active yourself, and more importantly, engage. I think what a lot of people forget about these platforms is that they are intended to be social platforms. It's the idea of social media is talking and commenting on other people's posts and being an active member of your community. That's how you gain traction and get people interested in the content that you're producing. It's not by broadcasting into a megaphone.
Do you see any ethical concern with if I have some talented person on my team and they're logging in under my name on LinkedIn and they're posting messages under my name, even though I technically didn't write the message, but it's written in my voice? I post, or that my person posts that on
Yeah.
my behalf. And then my person is also replying to people who comment on my post as if I'm actually the one who wrote that. Is that just commonly accepted in social media that that's okay and everybody understands that that's okay? Or are we sort of tricking the consumer to think that, oh, yeah, actually, John did respond to that when really it was, John's associate on the
Hmm.
team that responded, not John. But I thought I was communicating with John. Is that an issue or?
Yeah, I guess it kind of depends on how much you want to think of yourself as a brand. We think about the brand of your business, and anybody can communicate technically from that brand, and it feels like one, hopefully, if you're doing it well, like one consistent voice. The idea of a personal brand very much is a real thing, and I guess you have to make that decision for yourself. I've never heard that point of view. What's your thought? Are you on the side that's
Well, I
unethical?
mean, I get me personally, like if I'm responding to Joe Smith on LinkedIn and then Joe Smith replies to my reply, I'm hoping it's Joe Smith that I'm actually talking to and not
Yeah.
Joe Smith's assistant. I mean, I
Yeah.
would I would not feel happy if it was Joe Smith's assistant, unless they made it clear, like, hey,
Yeah.
Joe wanted me to mention this to you, kind of thing. Then I get it.
Yeah.
But if they're trying to portray that I'm actually communicating with Joe and it's really not Joe, I'm probably not going to
Yeah.
be too thrilled by that. Talk about this idea of authenticity.
Yeah.
That's not authentic to me.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
it,
No,
by
that's
by
fair.
contrast, though, if I was interacting with, uh, the Schwab brand on
Brand. Yeah.
LinkedIn, yeah, anybody can respond to that because I'm not expecting Charles Schwab to respond or Liz Ann Saunders to respond.
Yeah.
If it's just the generic Schwab brand, that's totally okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if it's a specific person, I would want to know that I'm actually communicating with that person and not their
Yeah.
assistant unless they make it clear that I'm, their associate type thing.
Yeah, that certainly would be ideal. I think CEOs often have like an executive assistant, for example, responding to emails for them. I think it's the same level of thinking where, yes, ideally they're talking to that person and that's how you build trust. But, from my point of view, so long, if they are going to do it again, ideally it would be somebody who spends a lot of time with them and ideally has that communication back and forth. Like, hey, this comment was said. What are your thoughts? It's not literally a different person's thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's switch gears a bit and talk about AI. Pretty much every
Okay.
conversation I have these
Yeah.
days, we're going to be talking about AI. So, what role is AI playing in your business? How are you using AI as you work with your clients in their branding and their messaging? How do you think AI is going to be evolving in the work that you do?
It's incredibly helpful in the discovery phase. We try our best not to use it when we're producing a message or an outward facing communication system because people can sniff that out. I mean, we've
Yeah.
gotten to the point with AI where we all know when it's AI, but it's a great tool when you have a large data set, like a client survey, for example. We might send out a survey to hundreds of clients, and we need to distill that in a way that we can take some sort of valuable nugget away with. Or if we're doing we do a lot of ideal client interviews. So interviews just like this, where we'll spend a half an hour trying to understand their audience and what they care about, then upload that transcript into AI and try to pull away relevant insights that we can bake into our platform. But it is getting to the point, AI is advancing so fast where even from a design perspective, like building ads, for example, we can feed it a high level campaign strategy. Here's who we're targeting. Here's what our message is overall. And here are the different kind of touch points that matter to us. And it can spit out campaigns for us that we can then, put in front of our copywriter and our strategist to refine. It can do that so much quicker than us, pumping out 50 different ads. Even from a design point of view, we haven't started using this yet, but I am aware of tools that will create kind of like a first draft of design, and we still need that kind of human touch point to bring it up to our standards. But if it's taking away kind of like the drudgery work that our team doesn't love to do anyways, then I'm all for it. I think it's a great tool to help enhance what we do.
So longer term, do you feel like as AI continues to develop that it's going to be a net positive for a company like yours? Or do you think ultimately it's going to get so sophisticated that it might be a threat to the work that you do?
It'll be a threat to things that, I would be willing to let go. That's my point of view anyway. We're trying to stay ahead of it as much as possible. We certainly think about our value proposition, where we fit in the market. The more we lean into something like execution on marketing campaigns or building a brand, then certainly that's less defensible. But if we're focused on strategic consultancy and understanding their market and talking to the people that they serve, like those are the types of things that have a lot of nuance and creativity involved that AI might be able to brush up against in a few years, but I don't think it's going to match the level of human ingenuity that we have today. So as of now, I see it as a net positive for what we do and what we like to do. That's where we want to spend our time and effort anyways. But I could see a world in, 5, 10 years where even that becomes more commoditized. And at that point, we'll see. Maybe I'll start a farm and retire.
Shear sheep.
Yeah, exactly.
Spin wool. Yeah. All right. Let me switch gears one more time. So you
Yeah.
said you started the business here in 2022. Here we are in 2026. So it's been a few years. knowing what you know now, and so sort of looking back, what do you wish you would have known in 2022 when you were starting this business that for the benefit of the past few years you've actually learned and wish you would have known back in 2022?
Mm. I wish we would have known quicker who an ideal client is for us. We certainly spun our wheels in the first year or two with a couple of clients that had we turned down or fired quicker, we would have been much further in our journey. I think firms like ours and even financial advisors undervalue the importance of the right fit client. It can be so detrimental to your progress if you're spending your time and effort with the wrong types of people. So yeah, that'd be my answer. Just have a better articulation of who we work well with and a better filter. Now our lead form on our website has a series of 10 plus questions that are so fine tuned to exactly who we want to work with. It's very unlikely that we'll work with anybody who isn't a perfect fit for us.
Yeah.
And
Well,
vice
and
versa, by the way. It's got to be mutual. So,
exactly. Yeah. And I mean, this sort of brings up another, what I think is an interesting question, which is, so you're purposely trying to select the right fit clients. You've got these 10 questions on the website. And so you're going to turn away a lot of people, as we talked about, sort of the repelling piece. How do you balance, or how do you think about the tension between, we only want to bring on the right fit clients, but we also want to grow? Do you have like aspirations to,
yeah.
build the next big organization, or are you just very happy growing at the level that you're growing and you're going to continue to build the thing the way you're building it? Or is there any tension in there at all in the pace of how
Mm,
you're moving here?
yeah. Yeah, so I guess the counter to what I just said would be, if we had not taken on a larger set of clients that, maybe weren't ideal earlier in our journey, maybe we wouldn't be where we are today because that helped fund the future of Objective Brand. So, from that perspective, I think financial advisors probably deal with the same thing where in your earlier days, you take what you can get because that's what it takes to build a good business. You have that aspirational vision and that mission behind your company. So long as what you're doing is in service of that future vision, then I certainly could see that trade-off making sense. When it comes to what we're building, I certainly don't want to be a, 100, 200 person agency or studio. I view what we do as very boutique and very specialized. And I certainly would love a team of 30 to 50 to give us more capabilities, more specializations within our firm, and a larger revenue base to be able to do more of what we want to do and be a little bit more philanthropic. But outside of that, we're very comfortable with the pace that we're growing at, and we have great clients that are having success. So at the end of the day, we want to have fun and put more value into the world, and that's what we're doing.
And do you still have a wait list for people to work with you, or how far out are you booking right now for ideal clients?
Yeah, so we're booking into the summer right now. Thankfully we've grown our team, so we've been able to open the funnel and serve more people. So, yeah, if anybody needs up with their brand marketing foundation, then fill out the form on our website. And as of now, I don't know when this drops, but sometime in the summer we have space.
And that's objectivebrand.com.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. All right, John. Appreciate you taking some time to
Yeah,
be on the show today.
thanks so much, Steve. See ya.